Hello everyone, welcome to our series, The Lightbulb Sessions. The Great British Entrepreneur Awards, in association with BT Skills for Tomorrow, have designed a free live stream series of Lightbulb Sessions to support small businesses and entrepreneurs with insightful and advice-driven sessions, featuring some of the UK's brilliant entrepreneurial minds to illuminate your path to entrepreneurial success. You can find out more about BT Skills for Tomorrow by heading to their website, www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow, or by clicking on the link in the comments section. In today's session, Great British Entrepreneur Awards Head of Content Jonathan Davies will speak with founder of Influencer Ben Jeffries and Influencer Marketing Manager of Shreddy, Laurr Lethbridge-Hall. Ben and Laurr will share their insights on the benefits of working with influencers, how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the industry, and how SMEs can harness the power of influencers. There is an opportunity to ask questions during the session. If you have a question you'd like to ask Ben and Laurr, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to these throughout the session. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Jonathan Davies.
Thanks, Chloe, and Ben, Laurr, thanks for joining us today. I think it'd be a really great place to start to kind of get a bit more background to the both of you and what you guys do in the space. So Ben, if I could come to you first on that, please.
Of course. So, hi everyone. My name is Ben. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Influencer. We are an influencer marketing platform. We work with a bunch of different agencies, different brands to really build meaningful relationships between the creators and these brands. So we've scaled up to over 60 people across London and Kiev at the moment. And we've got some really exciting things in the works for 2021 over in the US.
And Laurr.
Hi, so my name is Laurr Lethbridge-Hall and I am the Influencer Marketing Manager at Shreddy. So Shreddy is a leading algorithm-driven app that offers personalized fitness and meal plans, a supportive community, and we've recently launched equipment to help you reach your fitness goals all in one place. And I come from an agency background, working at a variety of small and large agencies across clients such as Amazon, Coty, TK Maxx, and Boots.
Excellent, thank you. I think we'll kind of split this discussion into two aspects. I'm looking at the industry as a whole and kind of the background and trends and things like that before we move on to sort of some of the more practical elements for businesses. So I want to start off, obviously a year or so ago, probably 18 months, the Competition and Markets Authority kind of had a big clampdown on the advertising industry and the influencer industry. What impact do you think that's kind of had on the actual performance and results of campaigns? Laurr, if I could come to you on that first, please.
Yeah, so I think the increased transparency on influencer paid ads has grown sort of hand in hand with the audience's understanding of influencer marketing and what its purpose is. So I think while there definitely has been, like, in terms of the algorithm and effect on engagement on these type of posts and what they're receiving, I think in many ways this transparency has improved influencers' relationships with their audience. So has made sort of in many ways these partnerships more effective. So I think really it just comes down to making sure that an influencer is a genuine match for your brand to ensure that despite sort of the increased transparency being present on those posts, that you still have that engagement coming through.
And Ben?
Yeah, I think, Laurr makes a really good point around the increased transparency. And I think that was perhaps not, prominent before the hashtag ad or the paid partnerships tools came into play, because the art of influencer marketing is really it being an authentic relationship between the brand and the creator. So what the increased disclosure requirements have done is put that pressure on the creator to make sure that the brand that they're actually working with is actually an authentic collaboration, because the followers, now can see themselves whether the influencer or the creator is getting paid for it. So it puts that increased pressure that it's a genuine, authentic collaboration. Because if it's not, and the followers can start seeing that the creator's working with a brand where it's not an authentic collaboration, they'll simply just unfollow them, leave negative reviews, and won't act on it. So the brand won't get the success that they're after. So it's certainly put an added pressure on the creators to be that much more authentic and have that more genuine relationship with the brand.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And obviously this space in the grand scheme of marketing is still very, very young. Do you think that that has been kind of the major development since it began? You know, we're talking certainly the past decade.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ben, on.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, we've had so many different trends in the influencer marketing industry, from fake followers to micro influencers to all of these different, you know, I think nano influencers all buzzing up over the years. I think influencer marketing's got a long way to go still to catch up with the rest of the advertising industry, but it certainly has grown up, is probably the best phrase to use, in conjunction with other marketing forms, and we're seeing that more and more from, I guess, influencer marketing being a wider part of the marketing mix. And, you know, we always say this to our advertisers: we don't necessarily compare influencer marketing to TV advertising. We don't compare influencer marketing to out-of-home advertising. We say it's the perfect complementary tool to all of these other forms of marketing. And you can use influencer marketing to build up a different type of buzz. You can build it, you know, you use it to build up a buzz on social, build up that influential conversation. And you can use the assets created from influencer marketing to help support the wider advertising campaigns and the wider marketing campaigns that you're actually using.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, you know, as social media and wider media evolve so quickly, and there's something new every single day, every single month, whether it's a new sticker on Instagram, whether, you know, I know even just this week, like the actual interface of your home screen on Instagram switched around completely, and notifications are up top and there's a shopping tab on the bottom. All of these updates, I think it's really unique that influencer marketing kind of evolves directly hand in hand with these sort of updates. So, you know, we're constantly having to shift and evolve in the same way that these platforms are, to make sure that we're able to deliver, you know, the best possible engagement through our influencers, using engagement driving tactics and finding new ways to engage our audiences. So yeah, I just think it's really interesting to sort of watch how you know, the various different channels kind of evolve in parallel, and how influence continues to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading a number of reports on the industry, and one kind of jumped out at me that suggested that the ROI for influencer campaigns is going to drop by around 2/3 over the next year, 2 years. But at the same time, brands are actually spending more on this area. Is that something that you're seeing, both of you, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think obviously, like we were just saying, like influence evolves at hyperspeed, just like so many areas in social media. But I guess from my perspective, it really depends on what type of ROI you're looking at. So like, whilst you can take like a personalized link and track direct conversions, there's also a huge amount of value driven by influencers and metrics like brand awareness and affinity and engagement also. So I think in some ways, the shift is where brands are stepping away from having like a single lens view of what ROI looks like in influence, and are kind of broadening that perspective. So I guess it's more so something, I view it as something that is shifting in the industry rather than like taking a step back, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, from my side, it'd be interesting to, I guess, see who wrote that article, just from, I guess, what perspective say that the shift in ROI. But I think, look, ROI could be seen to be dipping in influencer marketing from ROI based on what a like and a comment means. And I think it's the companies that are focusing on the social metrics are the ones that won't actually win within the industry. And it's the companies that are focusing on the more tangible, you know, actual deliverables, such as what Laurr was saying, you know, around, okay, what's the conversion? Is it the conversion based on a brand uplift? Is it a conversion based on a click or a sale? That's where you'll start to see the real power of influencer marketing. I mean, you know, for us, we recently launched a paid media division at Influencer, and we started guaranteeing sales in conjunction with influencer marketing. So I think it's certainly strengthening the ROI in some sections where, again, it's influencer marketing catching up with the wider marketing industry.
Yeah, just you mentioned there about guaranteeing sales alongside the campaigns. How does that work?
So, I mean, it's using a combination of both influencer marketing to get the right assets, to get that initial conversation, and then retargeting their followers with a paid media approach. So you're retargeting the people that have been exposed to the initial influencer marketing adverts. And then you're retargeting them with offers and call to actions. So then you can actually guarantee sales based on that, because you can optimize the types of call to actions that you target them with. So that's what our paid media team do. That's worked really successfully for apps especially, but also for e-commerce businesses.
Okay. Even in this sort of 10 minutes that we've been talking, we've kind of touched on the fact that the industry has changed so much and is going through changes all the time. And even in its quite short lifespan, we're already getting terms like influencer fatigue cropping up around the place, and where people are tired of seeing sponsored posts and hashtag ad and hashtag gifted and these sorts of things, and even to the extent with the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix, where people are almost becoming tired of social media to an extent. Laurr, I know that a big part of Shreddy's overall strategy and core value is to allow and encourage creative freedom with the influencers that you work with. How important is that in building the authenticity that we were talking about to beat that aspect of influencer fatigue?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like Ben was saying earlier, like audiences are becoming so much more sensitive to a genuine collaboration. And we need to be so aware of that our side, because in terms of the money, the spend that we're putting into influence and the ROI that we're trying to return, the second an audience senses that something is inauthentic, it almost makes that collaboration void. So I think obviously finding those genuine partnerships is one thing, but it's also important to brief them in a way where they can maintain their sort of hard-earned integrity and voice amongst their audience through their content. So I think the motto for me would always be to encourage utmost creative freedom from our influencers within the basic brand parameters we have in place. So, for example, as a first step, we'll always have an open conversation with the influencers about the type of content and messaging their audiences respond best to, and then build a brief based on these things. So I suppose it's more so of a collaborative effort between the influencer and ourselves, rather than being really prescriptive with what we're sort of telling them to do. Like, here, we want you to do a post, here's a caption, here's what we want you to say. Because having that kind of more natural messaging and natural content format that fits seamlessly into what they're used to doing on their feed will capture the attention of their audience so much better, and in the end drive the desired response that we're looking to for our wider business objectives.
And Ben, are you seeing brands already waking up to the fact that they need to allow for this wider creativity, or are you kind of seeing brands coming to you and you as influencer are kind of having to say, look, we need to change how things are going a little bit, we need to allow more creative freedom with the influencers? Are you seeing that in the brands you're working with?
100%. And I think influencer fatigue's a bit of a funny one. I mean, I've certainly unfollowed people because I've got a bit fatigued by the number of ads that they've done which aren't necessarily authentic. And I think it stems back to that authenticity element, where it's important that there is a genuine connection and genuine relationship between the creator and the brand. So, as Laurr said, creative freedom is key to that, because creative freedom allows to actually be open and honest about what key features and what key parts about the collaboration the creator actually likes and the creator wants to talk about. So I think that's very, very important, as well as having it in their own authentic voice and their own natural tone of voice, which their followers are used to, is really, really important. I think in terms of the social dilemma as well, I think again it highlighted a really important part, which is again that social metrics aren't necessarily the key metrics that brands should be considering with. You know, we've seen how Instagram, you know, have been hiding likes, and in New Zealand they're even going as far as hiding follower numbers. And that's because that these social metrics are perhaps the ones which people are paying most attention to at the moment, but the ones that they shouldn't be, because they're not showing the ROI. And it's perhaps those ones which are giving people most fatigue, you know, at looking at, just saying, oh look, those are the ones which just drive, you know, comment bait or like bait, so to speak. So I think, you know, we're certainly seeing shifts in creative, with brands being much more open to allowing creators to have that, you know, that creative freedom, as Laurr puts it.
Yeah, and are there any brands that spring to mind that are doing it particularly well? I mean, off the top of my head, Amazon's campaign around the release of the Borat film, I found quite brilliant in that sense, that they were working with a lot of creators, and you almost didn't know at the moment that you started engaging with the content that it was going to be an ad for the film. It was just a small section in the middle of a video or a post that was just completely and utterly what you would expect from that creator.
100%. I think, you know, we work with a number of brands. I mean, you know, something which we've been really trying to promote actually in partnership with Ogilvy is a transparent and, you know, and honest connection with these creators. So, you know, when we've worked on collaborations for the likes of Boots and TK Maxx as well through them, they have been really, you know, authentic and transparent, because the creators have been given the creative freedom to actually just give their honest review about the product, or give their honest review about what the actual product actually means to them, and what their followers would genuinely be interested in hearing about, not necessarily what the brand's key messages are. So certainly seen that. But, you know, you do get some brands as well who are perhaps willing to really like push the boat out, so to speak, and tread very carefully, such as, you know, the Borat example that you gave. We see that as well with some other collaborations we do with like some of the dating apps. We work with both Badoo and Bumble, and they're very much as well like, you know, just be honest, just talk to us about stuff. And like, you know, they go as far as saying like, you know, talk about why you use dating apps. Is it to actually go on a date, or is it to, you know, try and find someone for a hookup, and then actually talk about that in a post? So, you know, you do get different brands shifting, so I say, the boundaries, so to speak.
Yeah, I think one of the I guess it's a slightly different angle, but one of my favorite campaigns I've seen recently is for Estrid razors, which I'd be really surprised if you haven't seen something for Estrid razors, because I think their actual tagline is the razor that everyone's talking about, because they've developed this kind of like 5-tier strategy where they're, you know, working with people from, you know, absolute top of the top, huge followings, all the way down to sort of nano influencers with 1,000 followers, and sending them these beautiful pastel colored razors that are, you know, recognizable in a second once you see them, and basically just getting everyone to give an honest review and boosting the posts as well. And basically news feeds have just been completely flooded with honest testimonials about this product. And I just think that that's a really interesting strategy for, I don't know, just distributing consumer opinion on the products, using a variety of different influencers that all kind of support different objectives.
Yeah, and I know that you've both discussed the changes going on in the industry. Is there a particular avenue or platform or strategy that you are seeing that has the most potential going forward? I know that obviously TikTok has exploded the past year or so, and a lot of brands and advertisers are starting to ramp up their interest in that area. Ben, if I could come to you on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, TikTok's explosive growth over the last year particularly can't be ignored. I think, you know, they've really come to the forefront of being that major player that they are over in the Eastern world. But I think, you know, Instagram, 90% of our campaigns still include an element of Instagram, whether it's still a story linking over to a YouTube, or a story even linking back to a TikTok, right? So Instagram, especially with how innovative they are and consistently launching new features like, you know, Reels. Today they launched guides as well. They're being consistently pushing things out where they help keep to the forefront. I think, though, in terms of trends and, you know, what we'll start seeing is certainly longer term collaborations. I think it's something which is quite obvious really, but you know, going back to the authenticity element, we'll start seeing perhaps brands not go for that explosive, you know, get as many people as possible talking about it, but, you know, work with more creators on a longer term basis. And then I think the other trend, which is something which we're trying to push, is, you know, that trend towards guaranteed sales, because influencer marketing needs to be catching up with the rest of the advertising industry. And the only way it's going to be able to do that is by stop looking at things like vanity metrics. So it's either, or it's guaranteeing business results, not just guaranteeing sales, because the KPIs of the campaigns might be brand awareness. So it might be, as an example, we're guaranteeing a certain element of brand awareness based on what, you know, either Nielsen or one of our partners like IBM Watson is saying as a level of increase. So it's guaranteeing more tangible business results is probably the biggest trend for me.
Laurr?
Yeah, I think particularly for me, to Ben's point about long-term collaborations, I think there's so much value in building longer form relationships and almost building a community of influencers that you work with that kind of pick up an advocacy. It kind of becomes a tumbleweed that grows and grows. Their audiences know that they are a true advocate of your brand. And something that we are taking it to at Shreddy, which is kind of just a step further in that long-term collab structure, is actually product collaborations. So working with an influencer to launch a product in collaboration with the brand, and kind of having them on every step of the way as we develop the products, as we develop the marketing campaign, tone of voice, colors, everything, and just bringing them really into that process. And then in the end, in terms of the results that that campaign drives, we're getting basically access to a brand new audience. Because, you know, as this product is equally sort of theirs as it is ours, it's allowing us to get into you know, the minds of an audience that perhaps wouldn't be our native audience necessarily, but it just represents a really unique opportunity to kind of capture them and cross-pollinate with both our own audiences and theirs as well.
Yeah, I think both really great points there. Obviously, looking back over the last few months, we know that entire industries have been turned upside down by the pandemic. What impact has it had on influencer marketing, and what changes have you seen in consumer behavior? Laurr, I'll come to you first on that.
Sure. So yeah, like you said, I mean, there's been like a huge amount of effect on all areas of the industry. And I think the main thing is that so much traditional production has been halted due to everything being closed, due to social distancing. So brands have basically shifted their focus to influencers to take content production quite literally into their house. So, you know, I think the reason why is obviously because influencers have built their businesses off of being able to connect virtually with audiences, and they're talented content creators, and they have that unique all-in-one ability to take creative direction and create high quality, produce content from their homes. So I think influencers have really allowed us to remain agile in a time when things are changing so fast, and it's so crucial for us to have the ability to flex and flow with the circumstances that are around us. And it's also worth, from a consumer perspective, that, you know, this year we've spent more time confined to our homes than ever before. And that primary outside resource has been our phones. It's been the media that we're consuming. So I think influencers have become more important than ever in terms of content creation. And also it's interesting to see how much closer online communities have kind of pulled together as support systems in such a turbulent time. So I think sort of this element of supportive community has definitely been one of the biggest changes seen in consumer behavior, and just the genuine need for genuinity.
Ben?
Yeah, I think if we're honest with ourselves, you know, April and May was an interesting one for the wider advertising industry, because you just had global advertisers pausing advertising for the first time in, you know, some in 30, 40 years. So it was an interesting shift back then. But then when things did start to restart, people were like, okay, well, where do we know, you know, the eyeballs are guaranteed, right? And I think if you think about what influencer marketing essentially is, it's word of mouth, but just redefined in the modern age, because it's where are people talking to each other, which is on social media now, right? So people, I guess, took that approach and they said, well, I want to guarantee that, you know, my advert's going to get seen no matter what sort of government guidelines came out, no matter what sort of stops we would actually have. So we did see a massive shift. We had quite a few record months in, I guess, the middle part of this year, where advertisers were just weighing in on influencer marketing because they knew the eyeballs were there. And to, you know, to go to Laur's point as well, you know, content creation also became a huge part of it, where we were having advertisers not just use the creators to post on the creators channels, but also to create assets for their other types of marketing forms. So we had a lot of branded content come in, like, you know, requests from stores, particularly within the fashion industry, to have these assets for like their paid media and just refreshing things on their website and so forth. And, you know, I think we did an actual study with Global Web Index, which you can actually all have a look. It's on influencer.com, and it's just the tab called Research Report. And it talked about how consumer trends actually changed. And it talked about how people massively spent more time on social media during lockdown, and that their consumption on social media and their engagements they were giving on social media was actually their new normal. I hate that phrase, but their new normal, and they were going to continue using that moving forward. So, you know, I think that's something which is certainly really interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll shift on to the kind of the practical aspect of working with influencers and creating campaigns. I think a lot of people would say that it's fair to say that the perception of the industry is that it's the world's biggest brands working with the world's biggest influencers. But obviously we've seen, as we've said in the discussion so far, that micro-influencers and even nano-influencers have come to the fore in recent years. But is it a strategy that is accessible for smaller brands to work with influencers of any size?
I think there's no denying that big companies working with, you know, big influencers does represent a segment of the industry, but I don't, you know, it's certainly not limited to this. I think this particular approach obviously requires a large amount of budget that isn't something that's going to be accessible for some smaller brands. However, I think there's definitely still value in starting conversation with these bigger influencers, particularly where you see there's strong alignment between your brand and their values, you know, and just building this relationship. So, you know, down the line, if something like that does become accessible, they're kind of aware you've increased your brand visibility, but also even just for things like gifting, obviously, you know, with gifting, obviously it's more product focused, but, you know, there's no way to guarantee posting, but it still, you know, provides that visibility and does actually begin to build that relationship with the influencer as well.
And Ben, what would you say is the kind of the most important factor that a business should look for when they've got a campaign in mind, they know what they want to do, they just need the right influencer? What do you think is the most important factor in finding the right person?
I mean, you know, I think the most important factor is there a genuine relationship? I go back to that, is there actually a genuine relationship between the creator and the brand? But of course, that's only step one. There's multiple different elements to also consider. Does the data behind the actual creator themselves match the demographics that you're actually looking to reach? What you might find is that a fitness influencer based in London, who's male, might then actually have a female audience based in the States who's interested in something completely separate. So, you know, it's really important to look as well the data behind, and not just if there is that genuine relationship, then connected to that as well. It's also important to understand about the content creation abilities here, because you don't just want the creator to, despite having a genuine relationship, not produce some quality content which actually has an effect on the followers, right? So it's again, you know, looking to the actual content creation ability. But just going back to that previous question as well, that Laurr just answered about, you know, is influencer marketing only for big corporates? I think, you know, for sure, as Laurr was saying, you know, the Zoellas of the world, the Casperleys, obviously plugging my business partner and all, might only be affordable from, you know, said brands up at the top, but it doesn't mean that you can't necessarily work with them. And I think, you know, influencer marketing can actually be achieved for free, right? I think gifting and actually trying to build that relationship with the creators. Like perhaps if you can't offer them payment, you might be able to offer them experience, which they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So they're actually attracted to be interested into it. I actually saw a company the other day. It's a fashion brand called Newen, and basically they actually have given Marcus Butler shares to be a part of the actual business. So they wouldn't have been able to afford him to actually traditionally be involved within the business, but they've brought him into the company as, you know, a co-founder and given him shares, which has enabled him, you know, to be part of that brand. And I think, you know, there are certainly innovative ways which you can get those larger creators involved into the smaller companies to build up that genuine relationship.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And obviously you just touched on the kind of much bigger influencers. Why is it that micro influencers are such a big draw for businesses now?
I think from my side, in terms of why the micro influencers are so important is, you know, what's, you know, I guess going back to that whole element of word of mouth, you know, being redefined to the, you know, the modern age now. How powerful is having one, you know, person necessarily who might be the largest one talking about it, or having 30 people in a niche community all talking about it? And that's the way to look at it, right? If you can have multiple smaller people all talking about a product or a service, and people who are following these smaller people are not just following one of them, they're following multiple people here, and they're consistently seeing it. It's building up that organic buzz. So that's why micro influencers are becoming really important. And it's not just that, I guess, conversational buzz you're getting, but you're also getting, I guess, a large number of content assets as well being achieved from using multiple different creators. So you can achieve both scale in content, but also scale in voice from numerous smaller people.
Yeah, I would agree on those points. I think previously for me, micro-influencer, like, you know, campaigns, it's exactly that. It's a combination of being able to get that kind of blanket of messaging out in a really specific community that are literally interested in exactly what you're telling them, but also establishing that kind of mass content creation all at once that can be repurposed on own social channels and used in ads. And it's just a brilliant way to create content and drive effect in niche communities. And I think also, you know, when you bring in things like hyper localization, when you have a business, if, for example, if your business is a business that pertains to a certain area, if you're a shop in a certain town, you know, you might be able to find micro influencers within your town, even nano influencers that, you know, it's just someone who lives down the street, who's got a really strong following in your town. They've got, you know, 2,000 followers, and they're a fashion influencer and you're a fashion shop. Working with someone like that in a town where they have such a concentrated audience could actually create a huge knock-on effect in terms of driving footfall to your store, because they have that very specific niche influence in your area, in your specific genre. So it's a really good idea to consider that as well.
That actually absolutely perfectly answers a question that I was just about to ask that came in on the chat about adapting it to local businesses and local influencers. So one question that's kind of come through a couple of times is, how do you, so if you're a business owner, you're a small business owner, how do you actually start the process of trying to get in touch with an influencer?
I think starting to get in touch is one thing. I think obviously the number one thing that you just need to do before that is make sure that you're just so clear on who your audience is, what makes them tick, what types of content do they consume, what are they interested in, and then you kind of work backwards from there to find your influencers. And once you found your influencers, in terms of kind of the technical approach that I would take, it would be, think of it as like, think of this influencer as your colleague. Respect them in the way you would your colleague in terms of their expertise, you know, what they know about their own channel. They are so knowledgeable about what works for their audiences, what doesn't, and approach them like that and start a conversation. So stay away from, you know, the initial email being an absolutely massive paragraph that has every single piece of detail that they need to know, because they're going to open that and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, whoa. And so I would say the best approach would be to start very conversational and just kind of be like, hey, you know, I'm so-and-so from this brand, and I've been following you for a while, and I think you'd be a really brilliant match for the brand. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about potentially doing some work together, keen to get your thoughts. And, whether that leads to a casual back and forth on email, whether that leads to a phone call, again, back to what I was saying earlier about that collaborative approach, I just think that that is the best way to start any conversation with an influencer. And generally your response rate will be higher if you take that approach.
And make that, initial message as well personable, because influencers do get a lot of messages from brands, which is just like broadcast messages almost. So if there's something which can show that you've genuinely been a fan of them for a long time, do include that, because it will go a long way and it will just help with that initial relationship building. As Laurr said, just like building a relationship with a colleague, right? So yeah, definitely bring in a personal touch.
I think they're absolutely great points, and I think that'll be really useful to the audience. So I know we've talked a bit about building long-term relationships, and I guess that kind of fits in as well with almost treating them like a colleague and having that conversation that is kind of like the foundation of building a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I suppose, that's the foundation of building a long-term relationship, but it's also in conjunction with, I guess, how the followers are, I guess, perceiving the initial sort of brand collaborations, because, there's obviously having that genuine connection between the creator and the brand, but is there also that relationship between the follower and the brand? I think that's something which is really important to take note of. So you want to understand sort of, what, from a very basic level, what the sentiment is in the comments. Is it a positive sentiment? Are people actually reacting to it? And then as you go more granular from a performance angle, are people actually buying, and is there actually genuine brand uplift from that collaboration?
Yeah, and I think to that point as well, as you're seeing that sort of sentiment come through and the comments that are coming through and the data that's being shown on the other end, I think there's a huge amount of value in, again, back to the colleague point, especially with long-term relationships, having like check-in meetings with the influencer and saying, how do you think it's going? We noticed A, B, and C. What do you think that's from? They can offer a huge amount of insight because they understand their audiences so well. And basically any kind of insight like that can help you kind of shift and change your strategy slightly as you go to make sure that you're delivering the best results possible. So I think having just that, instead of it just being like a conversation at the beginning where you say, yeah, okay, here, here's your fee, here's your contract, here's your brief, bam, let's have the collaboration, kind of keeping those comms open as you go through the period of a collaboration is really valuable by way of collecting insights.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've had a question in the Q&A function that essentially asks about approaching influencers that aren't necessarily in the space that you operate in, if I can word it like that. So they use the example of if you're an ethical business, that you are trying to sell an ethical product, that you might not want to work with an influencer who is very prominent in that space because their followers are likely to be of the same mind, and almost kind of preaching to the converted, essentially. And any thoughts on that, Ben?
I mean, I suppose it goes back to what the KPIs are of the campaign, right? What do you want to achieve from it? Is it to drum up education to those who aren't within the same mindset, or is it to strengthen your brand awareness among those who are educated within that same mindset? So, there's no right or wrong answer, I suppose, to that question. It's much more, what as a brand do you want to achieve? Because there's benefits to doing both. And there'll be different creators who will be better suited to doing both as well. And I think it stems back to having that, or giving that the creative freedom, as Laurr put it, where you're saying to them, do you think your followers would react well to this? Do you think it'd be a good educational tool? Or do you think it would cause perhaps a bit of unrest and perhaps not be the right targeted approach? So I think it's having that open, honest conversation with the creators to help understand whether the content or the messaging would be right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, I think it's important to consider, like in that particular example where you're talking about ethics, I think it's important to consider that, maybe you are, but if it's a product, for example, you're not necessarily selling the ethical perspective, in the sense that, you know, like Ben said, is it about awareness or education? You know, if you've got an entire, you know, segment of people that are already basically in the mindset that you want them to be in by way of their ethics, then, you know, that is the perfect audience for you. So they still may have never heard of your product before. So it's not like you're, you know, wasting time and energy feeding a message that's similar into an audience that's already receptive to it. I think there's still a lot of value in remembering that. But yeah, when looking into new audiences, I think with influencers, if you want to go into an influencer's audience that hasn't necessarily been super, you know, expressive about their views on these sorts of particular topics, even if if you know where they've made an Instagram story before about their ethics or something like that, it's kind of knowing that seed has already been planted with their audiences, and perhaps that's an opportunity for you to go in there and expand a little bit more with your offering.
Excellent, and I'll take I'll ask one final question from the Q&A function, because it's been asked a couple of times, but I imagine it's going to be one of those how long is a piece of string answers. Obviously, the thing that people want to know is, how much do influencers charge?
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid it is a bit of a how long is a piece of string answer. I think, you know, there are multiple things which come into play with this, right? It's not just about follower numbers, and please do not look at follower numbers as the core metric. And it's also not just about engagement either. It's about other things such as, you know, what's the content creation complexity, what's the actual usage of the content as well. And there are a lot of things which come into play with it. You know, obviously as an industry, it seems to be moving much more towards impressions as are at least the initial figure that people look at, because those are actually guaranteed eyeballs rather than followers which are predictive eyeballs, which is, you know, quite prominent with the rest of the advertising industry, as impressions as a core metric. But then there are other sort of obviously metrics which come into play where it's, as I said, around, you know, well, are there any guaranteed business results coming into play, like guaranteed app downloads or so forth. But yeah, impressions is probably the initial number that people should look at. And then you can charge on a CPI, cost per impression, or a CPM based on 1,000 impressions.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Ben in the sense that impression or CPM is definitely the best way to standardize your costing. And I think another thing that comes into play alongside things like usage and complexity of content creation, particularly in the fitness industry where Shreddy is, it's such a saturated market that exclusivity becomes a really interesting metric. So, you know, I mean, I suppose it's not a metric, but it's a concept where basically, you know, any fitness brand, for example, with Shreddy, you know, we have our resistance bands, for example. So working with an influencer that decides to go and promote another resistance band brand at the same time that they're in a long-term partnership with us would severely dilute the messaging of our campaign. So it's important that when we're entering into contracts with influencers that we make it clear that it is an exclusive contract, but that's basically asking them to commit to turning away other contracts that is another source of income for them. So it's important to consider what sort of financial hit that is going to cause them as well. So I'd say that's alongside to the points Ben made, that's another main thing that needs to be looked at with brands and influencers.
Yeah, that's great. And we're almost out of time, and it's been a really, really interesting 45 minutes. So I'll just end on asking you both for your one single biggest piece of advice for SMEs looking to launch their own influencer campaign. Ben, I'll come to you first.
Use influencer.com. No, I'm joking. Your biggest advice is, you know, I guess going back to the last question, is don't focus on the follower numbers, don't focus on the engagements, focus on more tangible business result outcomes.
Yeah. For me, I think start small and scale up. So even if you just start with 1 or 2 to 3 influencers that are like absolute nail on the head, perfect for your brand, nail it with them, understand what works, what doesn't work, and then start adding 2 more, 4 more, you know, however you want to do your strategy. I think starting small and getting it right before you start trying to scale up and start working with huge follower numbers and things like that is a really good strategy.
Well, thank you both. Like I said, the past 45 minutes have been fantastic. I think both of you have offered some really brilliant insights and advice into the industry for our audience. So thank you so much. And with that, I will pass back to Chloe.
What an incredible session. Thank you so much, Ben, Laurr and Jonathan, for joining us today and sharing your expertise and knowledge. You can join our next Lightbulb session at the same time next Thursday, and we'll be joined by James Oakley as he discusses how much a small business should be spending on Google Ads. You can register for this session in the comments section. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the recording coming on later today. You can find the replay and future sessions at www.lightbulb-sessions.haysummit.com or by clicking on the link in the comments section. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Ben, Laurr and Jonathan.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.